Hello everybody and welcome to this discussion video on Imperator ROME, specifically taking a look at the UI design in the game. Now a couple days ago I did a video on the 1.2 Cicero beta, which is coming up in a couple of months, and I'd mentioned that the UI in certain areas was particularly bad, but I didn't have time to expand on it. Now a few people commented and said, hey, I'd like to hear you expand on it, tell us what you think would be good, maybe provide some suggestions, tell us what you think is bad and isn't working right now. So I decided to take them up on the offer. I made up a little bit of a mock UI in about 12 hours in Photoshop. Took me quite a while to think through what I was doing, and I decided, right, I've done enough now that I can present my case. But before we do, and before I show you that mock-up UI, we're going to have to first identify what the problems with the current UI is in the game. Now, many aspects of the UI, in my opinion, are fine. You know, I think the governor screen is totally fine. I think this top bar is pretty much totally fine. You know, it's passable, it's totally fine. It's not revolutionary, right? But it's not a detriment to the game experience, in my opinion. However, something like this screen, in my opinion, is detriment to the game experience, and it really puts people off when they're first learning the game. And if people are watching the game online, it also doesn't really do anything to make them think, yeah, I want to get involved on that and interact with it. So let's identify why that is, at least in my opinion. So the first thing would be the fact that cities don't really have personality, right? Having a look at this city, comparing it to this city, this one, any of these cities, you know, we take a look over here, we take a look over here, you know, there's really just not that much going on. The only thing that might change is the terrain, or maybe the, you know, the produce and the owner. That's really it. You don't have any other visual indication that this is India, that it was Britain a few seconds ago, or that it's Greece. They all look the same. There's no terrain that's only in India. There's no terrain that's only in Greece. There's no icons or images or anything to visually tell you that you're looking at a particular part of the world. So that's one of the flaws that I see currently with the UI. The next thing is that there's a lot of blank space, a lot of redundant space. This is a big portion of blank space here. There's all of these buttons that essentially are doing the same thing, right? You've got 30 buttons here for increasing and decreasing the building size. 30 buttons just to do that. Like you could, for instance, just as an example, have it so that you click a building, you know, and you see it be highlighted. Maybe it gets a little selection ring around it or square. And then you click a plus button down here, right? You click and then build, you know, and that would save a lot of space. You could double the size of all the building art if you wanted to do that. And that way your little one icon, your two icon, it wouldn't take up so much of the art already. Then we've got redundant and useless space over here. We have these big text boxes that are only going to ever have text in them that's, you know, 4, maybe 5 characters long. You know, if we have a 0.00% icon kind of thing. It's never going to take up the amount of space we have here, so that needs to be shrunken in. It doesn't need to be that big. Whereas something like this is totally fine because you could have Thracian here, or you could have Macedonian, you know, they're varying lengths of text and that's fine. But when you know that there's a limit on the thing it's never going to expand beyond that, there's no reason to have it like this. It's just wasted space that they're trying to fill in to match the size of this kind of domestic bar here, or the tactical bar here is trying to fix that. So it's not fitting right. You know, you can tell it's just not fitting right. So those are some of the problems that I have with it from just from visual distinction perspective. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop over to Photoshop and show you the changes that I've made, in my opinion, that make the city just look a little bit more distinct. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop. This is the exact same city, and this is using my mock-up UI. And I'll have to explain it a little bit to kind of explain what I've done and what I've changed, and we'll flick between the two every now and then, just so you can see. So the first thing we'll take a look at is the buildings, yeah? The buildings, I've gotten rid of all of those tiny little buttons, and I've actually grayed out the buildings that aren't built so that you can very easily visually distinguish what is currently there and what isn't, right? We know what's not there. All of this gray space, that's not there. It's so easy, in my opinion at least, to determine that those things aren't built. Then we have what's currently building. This is currently building. You can see that based on its bar over on this side anyway, so the bar is like slowly filling up. That's normal. And then we also have that the icon would slowly highlight in as it gets to completion. So it would be on a 0 until it gets in. You might remember, if we tab back, that everything here has a 0 next to it. And they're all fully colored, despite none of them being built, none of them being there. Whereas my screen only places a 0 as it's being built. And none of them have a 0 otherwise. And they all have bigger art as well. I've actually got to extend the sizes of these buildings because we've removed all those buttons. So you might be wondering, well, Darren, how do you build a building? There's no button to do it. Well, the way I would implement it is I would just have it so that you left click a building tile and it builds, and you right click and it destroys. Simple as that. You could also have a dialog box pop up and ask you yes or no to say, do I want to destroy it? Because obviously destroying a building is a big problem. So you just get a little dialog box. That appears anyway in the game and currently, so it's not even that big of a thing. So that's how I would do it. You right click, you left click to build, you right click to destroy. If you wanted, you could do it where it's just two little buttons somewhere, but I think this would be a perfectly fine method to doing it. You could hover over the building and a tooltip could expand and it would say down the bottom, left click, build, right click, destroy, right? If you really were worried that a user wouldn't know how to do that, because I guess there is no indication of doing it, though in this game you do right click to do certain things as well. So that's the kind of building setup there. That's one aspect of how to increase the art size, reduce a lot of clutter with the buttons, and also have increase the visual identification of what is currently built somewhere. Next, actually, before I move on, I did want to say that I would have actually put military buildings over on this side, and probably anything to do with pops over on this side. So any conversion buildings would go over here, and any kind of military-esque buildings, to do with supply, forts, defense, maybe even manpower would go over on this side. The reason for that is we have all of the military things that we associate with the city here. So having the buildings be a kind of an offshoot of that is just nice for the player to not have to think of too much distance between the two. And then likewise, having pops over on this side and having buildings that affect pops next to them would also help. So that's how I would order the cities. That's actually quite important for flow on the kind of user interface, which I currently feel like doesn't really exist, in my opinion. So anyway, next thing over would be pops. This is probably the most radical change, and this is a bit of placeholder on my part because I don't have that much time to go through a huge amount of the UI. So essentially, pop icons are down here. We have our citizens, freemen, tribesmen, and slaves. It's my opinion, and I keep saying my opinion a lot, and a lot of people call me out on that. It's just because I guess it's a bit harsh to say I'm right, but it's how I feel, is that I think pops should have some sort of visual identification to them. And whatever pop gets generated here using the character portrait generator should come from the dominant culture of that pop. So let's say, just for an example, that slaves' dominant culture was Egyptian. We should see someone that's a little bit maybe more tanned and Egyptian here. But they should always wear the color of their current class, right? So this would always be a gray pop. This is always going to be a brown pop. This is always going to be a blue pop. And this is always going to have, a bit of red and white and maybe some gold or something like that, because citizens are just a bit more, they use commerce and stuff like that. So that's the idea there. The other principal rule would also be that they have to all face the same direction forever, right? Head on is perfect. Like this guy, he's looking dead on, whereas everyone else is looking in all these different directions. That's just because I didn't have the time to find someone, who was looking the right way. So if I was building this system, these pops would be dynamically generated using the character generator based on the dominant culture that's there at the time. And then they would be color coded based on what pop they are. So this means if I was to look at a city here, I can instantly tell that these guys, we have the dominant up here, right? We know that this place is Hellenic. Actually, that's religion, sorry. Here's the culture, so Thracian, right? So we know Thracian is the dominant culture here. If we see that all of these are basically, white people, then essentially we can make a safe guess that they're all Thracian and the dominant culture is just reigning throughout every single class here. Whereas if we take a look at a different city, say in India, and I can see my scaling is a little bit off, so let's just do that to fix that. So if we were to look at this place in India, we can see that there's actually no pops in citizens, so it's blank, and then we've got 5, 5, and 5. And we can see that this guy is perhaps darker than the rest, and maybe that means he's a different ethnicity, and we could click in to then find out about that. This is extremely apparent when you have someone like the Seleucids, who are largely Hellenic, Macedonian, attacking Mauryaans, and if they were taking slaves, they would then have Indian slaves in this category. So a very stark difference upon looking at their city instantly. Same like if we were Thrace. If we were Thrace and we went down to Egypt, or we went to, hell, if we went to Britain or wherever, and we got someone who was Gallic or whatever, they would visually look very different. And that's just like, it builds this story that's really hard to get across in these images, but it builds a story that when I look at the city of Rome, let's say, and I see Romans in the first 3 classes largely, and then I see like some sort of foreign pop, I know where they've been, because I know where that pop comes from. And we can then expand that and look into it further. So on top of this, we actually have then the number of pops and then currently how happy they are. So in the game currently, happiness is determined by this like little icon here, and there's 3 versions of this icon: happy, not happy, and unhappy. So just three states that they can be in. In my version, I decided to opt away from that because I don't feel like that ever conveys enough. You typically want to know the percentage, and it's a tough one because I always like to go for more art, less numbers where I can. That's just the type of player I am, and I know that is the antithesis of most Paradox players, but I think here is the right call to give them the actual percentage because it's just so important. And then I would color code that percentage if they're below their base happiness, which means they're producing unrest. So for instance, the tribesmen here are producing unrest. Therefore, their happiness is only 25%. They're producing unrest. It's red. Uh-oh, you got something wrong. You need to then click this pop to go in to see what's going on. Clicking that pop will just be the same for clicking any of these 4 pops, which is currently how it works in the game anyway. If we click any of these 4 buttons, it takes us to this screen no matter what, either way. So that's basically what I would do there as well. And that's essentially the pop screen and the building screen, and that's how they work off of each other. Next is the only piece of art that isn't currently in the game, right? It's this kind of screenshot here. Now I've worked out that this would require about 7 pieces of art to cover all the major cultures in the game and be displayed everywhere, and then they need to be layered. So let me just show you an example of what this is. This is basically a view on the city and how built up it is. So if we were to go like this, we can see that now it's getting smaller, now it's really small. Yeah, so it builds up organically over time. So as the place grows, you could imagine that we'll have more and more complex city art. So this is just one image, but it's layered, and it's quite a small image, but this would be the only thing that Paradox will be required to make if they were to implement something like this. So they need 7 for all the different cultures, and then variants of those within, the different modules. So whether it has this wall or not, for instance, would have to be a module or a layer. Whether it has a coast or not would have to be a layer. So it can get pretty complex, but I've worked out that it's 7 with about 5 layers in each one. That would be modular, essentially. That would allow you to do it. So that would be kind of your art budget there. So we can see that now this is like, oh, it's a coastal city that's not very built up. Or now it is a coastal city that's more built up and it's got walls. Like, we know that it has walls just by looking at it. Obviously, we can tell that from here and the icon on the actual thing itself, but I think it's nice personally for some visual representation and identification that we can see it there. This is something that Stellaris actually does. Every planet has its own kind of terrain, and then it builds up the city depending on how many pops live in that place. So that's how I would do it. I would also have a rule, like we can see here in this Indian settlement, for instance. This settlement has no walls and it's quite underdeveloped. The other rule would have to be that the top of this is always pretty much the sky. This is already a rule they use for their terrain. The top is always the sky. No matter what terrain you look at, that's a rule that they implement all the time. The reason for this is actually that because we have the modifiers displayed along the actual skybox, if you will, as for as many as we can fit. And basically in the game right now, the way they do it is they have the modifiers go in this panel here. But I've decided that I just think it would be nicer if it was within the image itself. There's still plenty of room to put them in. We could segment this and put them in, but I just think it's nicer to have it above the actual city itself. So that's how I would do that. This is kind of your pop output area. Sorry, I'll go back to the Imperator Thrace one. So yeah, this is actually our pop output. They're outputting manpower, research, commerce, and tax, and that's what the pops are. That's basically how it is in the game right now. It's almost one for one the same. But then this is where we get a little bit different. We have the actual terrain that you'd be fighting in. That's a terrain image that's pulled from the game that's used when battles happen, whereas the normal terrain image in the game is just a little square thing. I just think it looks nicer, but it tells you the same thing. It would be plains. You hover over it and it would tell you plains, just like this one does. Plains. Simple as. Then we have the resource good that it's producing, civilization value and level, and then whether or not we want to develop that civilization further. Then we have the migration attraction, barbarian power, unrest, and province loyalty, or city loyalty to the province. That again is all basically the stuff that, mostly all the stuff that was down here, but it's just moved alongside this instead, or it's moved below it and alongside it instead of wasting all this space like I was saying before. The next thing is holdings. Holdings is now going to sit up here. I think it just suits it better, and it's very important about holdings and how many they are, especially when you need to give some to people. So I just think it should be bigger and it should be up top. Most of the time it's going to be 0, so it's not really that needed, but I just think it looks nicer where it is there. And then we can, this is our button to select and open up our new panel of cities, which is also currently in the game right now, right? So nothing too crazy. And then, like I said before, this is our kind of military and tactical area. We have our fort level, our fort defensive bonuses, our supply limit, attrition, and then whether or not we want to build ships or build units. So currently in the game, this is used as 2 big kind of buttons. I've limited that to just being smaller and using the icons for units or for ships, and with the money icon next to them to indicate that you're spending to recruit them. And that's essentially my province panel. And if we were to compare the two, we're comparing, sorry, not even province, city panel. If we're comparing this city visually to another city in India, I personally think they look quite different. Not as much as I'd even like, but I do think they look quite different. This is no buildings, so we can instantly tell that there's just no buildings going on here. We can tell their ethnicity is way different than ours. We can tell that it's got no walls and it's kind of underdeveloped. It's, you know, a lot of greenery and shrubbery. We can tell it's farmland just by looking at it. It's not plains. Like, to me, that's just so much better. And you really build a picture over time, especially with the pops. I feel that I feel like it's hard to explain, but you do build a picture when you click around and start to see different ethnicities all over the place. And then you start to see the game progress and you see mixes. And you can easily tell, like, oh, my capital is like really filling up with like some other ethnicity or some other religion and things like that. I think it's really cool to be able to do that. Now, you would still click a pop and get like this screen to show you, you know, the breakdown, how many pops are there, what's going on, moving pops to the cities and so on and so forth. Like, that still happens just the way it would in the game right now. And this screen needs to be vastly improved as well, but I didn't have time to remake everything. So that's essentially a look at the cities. Yeah, I've rambled on kind of a long time about that, but hopefully maybe some people agree with me, maybe people don't, but I really think that's the kind of direction I'd like to see. Just introduce some art, increase your art, don't be afraid to increase your art, and remove redundant space and redundant buttons. Like, it's so unnecessary, I feel. And I really do feel like this is just like a much better image for it. I mean, obviously I'm biased because I made it, but when I was done with it, I was like, damn, this looks good. I don't know, I just think it looks good. So the next thing we can do is then look at, okay, well, what does the province look like? And this is the one that I'm actually less happy with. So I think if I do this and then I do this, this is as if we just expanded our province, right? So if we just expanded this, I've just expanded that now as well. So again, very similar, but I've actually changed one core thing up here, which is really huge, which is the produced goods are now separate to your imports and your exports. This isn't final. Obviously nothing's final. This is all just mocked up anyway, but I never got to fully work this out yet, and I just didn't have the time. So essentially in the base game now, which is what we're looking at, we have what we're producing largely on the left and what we're importing largely on the right. What we're exporting, we actually just can't see. It doesn't show you, I don't think. Yeah, it doesn't show you what you're exporting. The only way you see what you're exporting is if you go to your trade overview, you filter by your own country, and then you look at your province and you see what you're sending. So we're sending out wine and salt out of this place, right? Wine and salt. The only way we could ever really discern that we're sending wine. Oh yeah, so it does say when you hover over it, it says trading to a certain place. And we can see that we're producing 2 salt and we've only got 1 available. So obviously we can discern that we've sent 1. I feel like, you know, having to go through that menu or having to hover over it is a bit of a problem in itself. I would like to just be able to see it, which is why I've separated them out. So we can see that we're sending, this is your imports up top, and this is your exports down the bottom. So we have 4 out of 4 import routes being used, which is the 4 icons there. And then we have 2 exports. You've no limit on your exports. It just depends on what other people want to take from you. And then this is what I'm struggling with, and I won't go on about it too long, but essentially your produced goods, I'm struggling with whether this needs to be the sum total of everything in the province or just the base of what you produce here. So if we were only producing 1 salt, this would always stay at 1, but we are giving 1 away, which means that we're actually not earning this anymore. This isn't active. So that is messy. I know that that's messy because it's not clear that we don't have this anymore because we're giving it away. So what I experimented with, and I won't bother going through the layers, is actually graying this out, which does look actually all right. And then the other thing was, okay, well, what about if we're getting a surplus from something? What if this is contributing to our surplus here, right? We have 1 wine right now. If we brought in this one, we should have 2. This should say 2. And in the normal game, it would say +2. That's what it would say, which would indicate that we're getting a surplus. Or it would say +1, I think, which means giving the surplus. Whereas I just have this as 1 + 1. So you're having to do mental arithmetic in a way, or just at least compare the icons and see, oh yeah, I'm getting a bonus. That's not ideal. So again, the other thing I had was this could be highlighted like kind of yellow, and this could be highlighted gray. So it's like, oh, you're losing this one, but you're gaining a surplus on this one. I know it's not ideal. I'm trying to work it out, but essentially something needs to be done, in my opinion, to show you your imports and exports separately to your produced goods in some sort of fashion. Now, the other solution I have in mind for this is province UI is currently attached to your city, right? So your whole province is here, this whole yellow band that we're looking at here. And if we were to go to the provinces map mode, the only province UI we ever get, let's just click away, is this. This is like the only thing you ever see about your province. Or if you go to your nation overview, you can see a province here as well. So we can see some information about the province. Now what I would do personally is have this map mode let you click a province and open up a special province view. Like collapse the city. I don't want to see the city. But below this province view, I should have another kind of list of icons here, like down here, which would be basically your imports and your exports. I think that would be so much nicer to see like another panel within this panel. Like get rid of the city at this point when I'm zoomed out, or when I'm in this map mode or whatever. Or even just in this map mode, like down here, just show me the list of things that we're bringing in and we're bringing out. And maybe even you could fit the flag icon of where they're going. I just think that'd be so much nicer than having to go to the trade overview screen to see that same information, personally speaking. And then as well, these export bonuses matter. You know, a lot of people don't even realize that if you export anything from anywhere, you get a global export bonus, like a global export bonus. So it's really interesting to see what you're exporting. That's why it's relevant to see that. And then obviously in your capital, it's very relevant to see what you're importing in, you know? And you can see that by hovering over this, but I just think, again, a little bit of visual distinction here goes a long way. I know I'm bringing in fish, I'm bringing in wine, I'm bringing in iron, and I'm bringing in woad. I can see that without having to hover over anything. If you just look at it here, we don't know what we're bringing in, right? So that's kind of my thought process on that, because tooltips, whilst good, tooltips are supposed to expand on something that you need more info on. But after you look at a tooltip, you shouldn't really ever need to look at it again. Whereas Paradox use it to actually store information, which is really weird. That's not actually quite common in a lot of games. They store information and things in their tooltips. Like if we were to go to decisions and we want to reunite Alexandros' empire, look at the size of this tooltip. It's giving me if we work from the bottom up, it's giving me a description, like a bit of flavor text. It's telling me the towns I need to take. It's telling me what I'm gonna get. And then it's telling me what I require. So it's giving me a lot in one tooltip to figure out. Whereas I feel like decisions should just have their own UI, and it should say, like, it should compartmentalize it, where it says, like, here's what you require, here's what you'll get, here's what you'll do, you know, and so on. Instead of having like these gigantic ass just tooltips. Like, that's not what a tooltip is supposed to do. It's supposed to be a tip on something that you don't understand. Now obviously I don't mind it in certain places. This game has a lot of information in it, so I understand, but generally a tooltip would be good for something like this. You know, a little button here that makes you go, what does that do? And then you know what it does, and you never really need to look at it again. But a tooltip that actually explains a mechanic, which is basically what a decision is really, really weird to me. Alright, so that's pretty much all I can really talk about for city UI and provinces. I didn't make any more mock-up UI, but something else I wanted to mention then before, you know, we kind of go, is diplomacy and variety again between nations and personality between nations. So if we were to let time play, I'll just let time play and we'll see what happens here. We'll speed it up and let some messages and requests come our way, which no doubt they will in a moment. Okay, so we're after getting two different messages here. Essentially, we've gotten a message offer of alliance from Getia, and we've got a kind of a trade request here. So a problem I have with these is the message delivery system, in my opinion, is really bad. I don't mind that they appear here. I think that's totally fine. They look good. I think the icons work well. And I like the way you can hover over and see what the nation is. But it's this thing. This little scroll thing is used so much in the game for so many little messages. It's like really just the fallback of the game, like constantly to see like, hey, we'll just throw up a scroll and write out what the person needs to know. They're missing a really big trick here, in my opinion, because you could... So, for instance, let's take an example, right? We have a trade request from this particular country, Oxuoia. Now, what I would love to see, and I mentioned this in my other video, I think, is that this trade request should be baked into a sort of screen. Like, let's take just this aspect of the screen. You know what? Actually, let's just do that. We can do that using this tool. So the snipping tool allows me to do that. We have just that screen, yeah? This screen is perfect to then have, you know, remove something that's maybe irrelevant to a trade request right now. So we don't really, let's see if we can just increase this line a bit. So we don't really need to see that. We don't really need to see that. But our relations are definitely important. Their technology level is pretty relevant. Their traditions, not so much. So we could use all of this space here, yeah? We could use all of this space to write out some text from this guy. We could maybe put his name up here. You know, Oxoia, you're dealing with John. Obviously, that would be his name. So we're dealing with John. Let's just undo some of this stuff. It's getting really cluttered. So yeah, Oxoia, right? John is talking to us. John is saying, hey, we want to do some trade. We feel this would be beneficial, blah, 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 blah. It could actually write that based on the traits that he has as a person. And then up here, maybe we could see the icons for the trade good that we want. Maybe the trade good that they want, or the money, you know, we can see certain things compartmentalized. So I would love a big ass trade message like this to hit your screen instead of just this, yeah, instead of just this generic ass scroll thing. I would love to know who the hell I'm dealing with, the faction, what they are, their technology, all in one screen, and it tell me what they want from me, you know, and give me a bit of lore, make me believe that John is actually saying this to me. Like, let's find out about John. Right? He is righteous and cold. So maybe he would have some flavor text that says, it's just very to the point. He's like, so what is this? An envoy from the Hellenistic power of Oxoia is requesting import leather from blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So they want leather, right? He could just be like, seeing as he's cold and righteous, he could be like, we deserve, you know, we would like to see this trade deal be done. We feel we deserve it. Just something like that. It's like, oh, he's actually pulling from his traits. You know, he's giving me a bit of flavor based on who he is. And we get to see where he comes from and all of that. Instead, it's just this. This is so generic. It's unbelievable. Like, it's the same for everybody as well. So that's just the way it is. Then again, we have something here like, so let's just decline that for now. We have offer of alliance from Getia, right? So we've got this person. Again, taking this kind of situation here, an offer of alliance. So this is very important, what we see in the screen. Right, so here we go. So now we have Getia, right? Getia are offering alliance. So it could say, yeah, it's good to know their traditions, good to know all of this stuff on top. Their ideas, I guess, are good to know. This stuff, it's kind of good to know, I guess. But some of this I'd maybe trade off for the message, you know, the message would always go here for either way. So it's like, oh yeah, you know what? I'd actually just get rid of the ideas. We don't need that either. So I still think this is like the area, this is like our workspace. So here, up here would be like, what are they asking for? This is the alliance, so we get an alliance icon. What else do we see normally? We don't, yeah, we just see an alliance icon. So alliance icon, and then it says like offer of alliance. Then we have like the text here that's kind of tailored to him. Maybe even a bit bigger because it might need a bit more space. So the text that's tailored to him based on his traits. And I don't know, do we need to know anything else? Not too sure. Maybe who else they're allied with. Their allies, you know, whatever's relevant to then this current thing, you know, because it's an alliance. It's like, is it relevant? What deals do we have with them currently? What deals do they have? What allies and wars do they have currently? So that stuff could be filled in there. I know I'm a bit rambly here. I'm kind of ranting, but hopefully you guys are kind of getting the idea and enjoying it nonetheless. You know, this is just where I think they should be going with it, because there's no personality. Like if we looked at, he's crafty and cruel. So maybe the way he would write that kind of message would be just a little bit darker. And obviously there's a lot of traits in the game, so maybe just have like 5 variations of everything, but then they combine with 2 or 3 traits, so you have all these different ways you can look at it. I just think that'd be so much better and add so much flavor to the game, because to me, you know, there's this split in the player base. Maybe I'm very much in the minority, where nobody is thinking that they need this stuff. You know, nobody's really thinking, because it's a map painting game where you're just thinking, oh, I just want to conquer. You know, I know people that play this game, they just basically play in this mode, they turn off the names of like settlements and stuff. They almost never look at characters and things like that. They just like stay super close and just move armies, and it's just a video game to them, right? Which is fine, but I really like to get immersed, like super immersed in the world, and try to have as many things that make me feel like these are people I'm dealing with. And by the way, when you deal with this person, Kaigaza, over and over and over again, you get these messages. We get, hey, another message from Kaigaza has popped up. Hey, another message from Kaigaza. You build up a relationship in your mind mentally with these people and get to recognize them. And when they die, you'll even go, oh, the leader of that guy died. Whereas with these messages, I'll never know who's ruling Getia unless I decide to click them and find out stuff. Like, I wouldn't know. And, you know, those are just some things that I would do, and I'd also have some of these traits also affect their probability of asking certain questions and things like that. That's just UI things that I think really should be in the game. Last thing I'll mention is when you're playing this game a lot, you will start to forget about the art and move away from it. That does happen 100 to 200 hours into the game. You know where you're going to click, you know what you're looking at. You don't need to look at that stuff as much anymore. But if you want to build stories and get immersed in the game as well, it's a really big added benefit to have a very clear distinction of what people are, where they come from, build that story. And then as well, I do feel like I provided some solutions just to make the UI look a little easier on the eye for people to use. Alright, so that's going to be it for the video. Hope you guys enjoyed the rant. The next one is going to be not a scripted video, or it will be a scripted video, so I won't always be going off the cuff like this because they can go on for quite long. But let me know what you think of the format either way, and if you like these kind of weird design discussions almost. I didn't actually really get into the weeds of design, which I kind of wanted to, but I don't have the time to go through it. But there's a lot of stuff that you have to think about in terms of where the player is looking, the flow of where things are, that I just didn't really get to talk about. So we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.